So therefore, dear friends, given this challenge, but also the need for us going forward to anchor universal health coverage in the expanding health architecture, I today direct as follows. And the first is that the Cabinet Secretary for Health, acting jointly with the Chairperson of the Council of Governors, shall constitute a national reference group on COVID-19 to review the efficacy of our response to this pandemic so far. The group should record lessons learned and feed them back into the sector nationally, but also in the counties. The group should also formulate strategies to identify our institutional weaknesses within our healthcare system at both tiers, both national but also county, and recommend also ways to increase the representation of county governments in the boards of healthcare agencies, and recommend ways in which our national responses to healthcare emergencies can be improved. The same national reference group on COVID-19 should position healthcare as a driver also to our manufacturing sector and our agenda by ensuring that preference is given to local manufacturers in the procurement of pharmaceuticals and non-pharmaceutical products, not just for this pandemic, but also taking into cognizance our universal health care agenda. The National Reference Group on COVID-19 should also expand their ongoing work and establish the Kenya COVID Vaccine Consortium so that our research institutions, which are already doing great work, can now come together, bringing on board all relevant stakeholders locally, but also partnering with those internationally, and together sharpen their focus on the development as well as the testing of COVID-19 vaccines locally here in Kenya and for our region. Next, following the allegations of impropriety at the Kenya Medical Supplies Authority, better known as KEMSA, the relevant investigative agencies of our country are currently fully seized with the matter. However, given the compelling public interest on the matter, the relevant agencies should expedite their ongoing investigations and conclude the same within 21 days from the date hereof. Fellow Kenyans, in line with my stated public policy on zero tolerance to corruption, I want to once again reiterate that all persons found to be prima facie culpable as a result of those ongoing investigations should be brought to book, notwithstanding their public office or their political, and for that matter, their social status. Fellow Kenyans, the pandemic before us poses an individual crisis. It poses a health crisis, but it also poses an economic crisis. If the cure for this crisis is civic responsibility, and indeed, I do believe we have and are doing well in that area, there are some good returns as well from our economic sector. While this pandemic continues to present us with various unprecedented challenges, we must also always remember that Kenya is a work in progress. And that is why, even as we face the challenges before us, we must also celebrate the good returns, even as we continue to battle the challenges before us. Since March of this year, I have given 10 addresses over the COVID-19 pandemic, and today marks the 11th one. And in the 10 addresses, I have made certain directives to cushion our economy and enhance the purchasing power of our people. The most notable one is the tax cuts that we announced at the very beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. Those tax cuts have put a total of 47.8 billion shillings in the pockets of Kenyans. This, added to the additional 14 billion shillings of VAT refunds that I directed in the same month of March. We have, in addition, ensured that tens of thousands of Kenyans in need have also had access to direct intervention through weekly cash transfers to them and their families to ensure that the most vulnerable in our society are able to overcome and withstand this crisis. Added to this, we have the hundreds of thousands of Kenyans currently engaged in our kazi mtaani. Again, engaging and meaningfully engaging our young people in civic duty and responsibility across the length and breadth of our country. Indeed, reviewing the results today, I must admit that we have done much better than we expected. For instance, even under COVID, our economy is growing at 4.6% compared to 5.5% at the same time last year. When we look at our inflation numbers, they are lower today, standing at 4.4% compared to 6.3% during the same period last year. The current economic indicators, without doubt, are lower, but definitely far better than we ever anticipated. But the inspiring success amongst us, more than the numbers I'm quoting, have been those who have used the COVID crisis to reimagine their conditions. Our banking sector, for instance, has begun to retool and to humanize their model as a result of our meetings at the initial stages of this pandemic. And instead of focusing on profits alone, they are re-engineering their model to focus more on their customers. Government institutions, for example, the Kenya Revenue Authority, have also remodeled their approach As an example also, instead of destroying 1.5 million liters of illicit ethanol that was in their custody, working together with other government agencies like Kenya Pipeline and many others, they converted that illicit ethanol into hand sanitizers that were distributed freely throughout the length and breadth of our country. But those aside, the most inspiring story of reimagining your circumstance during this COVID crisis is from a proprietor of one of the big private schools that unfortunately was forced to close. In order to meet his commitments and obligations to banks and suppliers, Juan Joseph Kumo turned his school temporarily into a farm, rearing chickens and producing food. Our exporters too are retooling and turning this unfortunate challenge into promise. For example, many expected that the thousands and thousands of Kenyans employed in our floriculture and horticulture industry would collapse. But instead, through various interventions, we have seen our horticultural sector earnings jump to Kenya shillings 81 billion between January and June 2020, compared to 76 billion for a similar period last year. Earnings from Kenyan fruits alone nearly doubled from Kenya shillings 7 billion to 12 billion. What these examples of retooling businesses in times of crisis teaches us is that a crisis represents both a danger but also an opportunity. And those who horrify themselves with danger, unfortunately, will not survive. But those who choose to exploit the opportunities presented by the crisis become the new heroes of the moment.